The wind hit Thomas 3 feathers in the chest like a punch, the second the heavy door slammed shut behind him. He staggered a step, clutching the clear plastic bag that held his past jeans that wouldn't fit anymore. A worn flannel shirt, 12 crumpled dollars, and a faded school ID that expired while he was locked up. No coat. No ride. Just hard sky and colder ground. The snow in the parking lot had been scraped into gray heaps along the edges, like everything unwanted was pushed out of the way. He stood there blinking against the sting of the wind, staring at nothing. He could still feel the woman's voice from moments earlier, ringing in his ears, clinical, indifferent. "You're all set, Mr. 3 feathers." She hadn't looked up once. She was already moving on to the next file, the next kid being processed like freight. He pulled the flannel shirt from the bag and shoved his arms through it. It smelled like cedar and smoke, like his grandmother Mina's house had once smelled before time, and weather began to take it apart. The buttons strained against his chest. He'd grown more than 3 inches since the day they'd dragged him into that detention center. 16 then. Now 18, technically a man. Legally an adult. No idea how to be either. Tomas exhaled into the wind and watched his breath turn to glass. A bus pulled into the lot with a wheeze and hiss. He didn't know where it was going and didn't care. He boarded anyway, paid the fare with a 10 and 2 ones, and took the last seat in the back where no one could sit behind him, where he could watch everything. The bus jolted forward. As Billings slid away in dirty snow and boarded-up windows, he pressed his forehead to the glass and let his thoughts run wild. He'd told the cops he was asleep in the back seat, that he had no idea what his cousin Marcus was planning, that he woke up to sirens and Marcus yelling at him to run. But that didn't matter. The plea deal was the smart play they'd said. Better juvie than real prison. So he said yes, even though it felt like choking. He didn't know what he was walking into now. Mina hadn't answered his last 3 calls. The last time he'd gotten through it wasn't her voice, it was some woman who said she'd fallen. Said she was in the hospital in Kalispell. Said she wasn't conscious. Then nothing. Silence. A stone wall. Yesterday, a social worker came to his cell and sat on the edge of the bunk like she was telling him what time lunch was. Said his grandmother had passed 4 days ago. Said there'd already been a small service. Said he was listed as her only living relative. Then she handed him a folded slip of paper with a name and number, Patricia High Runner, Tribal Legal Services. There were estate matters, she said. Estate. As if his grandmother could be boiled down to paperwork. She had raised him after his parents died in a winter crash when he was 7. Taught him how to read clouds for weather, how to stack wood so it stayed dry, how to walk land like it could hear you. She didn't say much, but when she did, it stuck. She was everything steady in his life until the day he didn't come home. The bus rode west on Interstate 90, cutting through empty miles where the world looked washed out and endless. Every town was a blur of gas stations and shuttered diners. The sun fell lower, dragging color out of the sky. Tomas drifted somewhere between exhausted and alert, a knife edge where sleep wasn't safe and waking hurt. By the time the bus pulled into Browning, it was nearly dark. He stepped off into cold that bit at the skin. There was a hollow in his chest that the flannel shirt couldn't touch. The payphone outside the gas station still worked somehow. He dropped coins in and called the number the social worker had given him. A woman answered on the 3rd ring. Patricia High Runner, she said. Her voice was clipped but not unkind. He told her his name. There was a pause. I'm sorry for your loss, she said. Your grandmother spoke of you often. She made arrangements. The ranch is in your name now. He stared at the snow packed around his boots. There are complications, she continued. The land carries debt property taxes, a late mortgage, unpaid utilities. Altogether, it's just over $31,000. The words hit him like cold water. There's an offer, she added, from a company called Snowhawk Properties. $42,000 for the entire parcel. So I'd walk away with what, 11 approximately. That's if you take it. And if I don't, the bank begins foreclosure in 60 days. The company wants an answer within 2 weeks. Tomas said nothing. There's something else, she said. Your grandmother left a letter. She gave it to me 6 months ago with instructions to only give it to you if you came back. If you saw the land with your own eyes. Not if you sold it sight unseen. His throat tightened. I can meet you at the property tomorrow morning, she said. I'll bring the documents and the key. Okay, he said. He hung up. The motel across the street was called the Glacier Inn. The front desk clerk didn't ask questions when he slid the cash across the counter, and Tomas was grateful for that. The room smelled like stale coffee and bleach. The heater clanged when it kicked on. He dropped the plastic bag onto the foot of the bed and sat down hard beside it, staring at the stains on the ceiling. For the first time in 2 years, he was alone without someone checking his movements, without a schedule taped to the wall, without a cellmate snoring 10 feet away. But freedom didn't feel like anything. It didn't feel real. He closed his eyes and saw Mina in court, sitting straight-backed on the wooden bench, her good coat zipped to the top. She'd brought her old leather Bible even though she hadn't opened it in years. He remembered the look she gave him when the judge read his sentence, stern, unwavering, but behind it, something else. This doesn't define you, her eyes had said. Now she was gone. He hadn't been there. Couldn't help, couldn't say goodbye. The heater rattled in the silence. Tomas curled his arms around his chest and lay back on the thin mattress. Tomorrow he'd see the ranch, see what was left, decide what to do. Outside the window, the wind kicked up again, and somewhere far off, a freight train moaned through the dark. The land looked the same, but the silence was heavier, like it knew she was gone. The morning hit hard. Tomas woke to the sound of snow sliding off the motel roof and a heater clicking itself into silence, exhausted from the night. The room was gray with early light, the thin curtains barely holding back the cold creeping through the glass. He hadn't slept much, not really. Just laid there listening to the rattle of the fan and the racing of his own thoughts. He rolled over and stared at the stained ceiling, then sat up slowly. His flannel shirt was wrinkled from being used as a blanket. The jeans still felt stiff and unfamiliar after 2 years of uniforms. He dressed, shoved the plastic bag into the motel trash can, and zipped up his hoodie a thin layer against the kind of cold that got into your lungs. Outside, the wind was sharp and the snow deeper than it looked. His breath rose fast and shallow as he walked down the road to where the highway met the outer edge of town. He stuck out his thumb and waited. The third car that passed stopped. The driver was an older man in a red truck with a cracked windshield and a thermos balanced on the dashboard. He wore a beat-up camo jacket and a ball cap that said Big Sky Feed and Tack. "Where you headed?" the man asked. "West. Blacktail Road." The man looked him over. "You're one of Mina Three Feathers' grandkids, ain't you?" Tomas nodded. The man jerked his chin toward the passenger seat. "Get in, then. Your grandma helped me foal out a mare one year in a snowstorm. Never forgot that." They rode in silence for a while. The heater hissed and the talk radio murmured under the noise of tires cutting through slush. The old man didn't ask questions, and Tomas didn't offer anything. He kept his eyes on the rising land, on the shadowed tree lines and fences half buried in snow. By the time they turned off the main highway, the peaks of the Rockies were visible again, sharp, white, watchful. Blacktail Road cut through a broad valley that seemed frozen mid-breath. The snow was untouched, except for a few narrow deer tracks. The wind had quieted, but the cold held firm. There, the man said, slowing, as they approached a wooden gate leaning hard to one side. The faded sign read, 3 Feathers Ranch. You sure you got a key for that house? Someone's meeting me, Tomas said. The man gave him a long look before nodding. All right then. You take care. Tomas climbed out, clutching his duffel. The truck rumbled away, and its taillights disappeared in the snow like they'd never been there. He stood at the gate for a long moment, staring up the driveway. The place looked almost exactly as he remembered, except older. Like everything had shifted down a notch. The main house, a long, low log structure with a wraparound porch, sagged at the middle like a tired spine. The barn's red paint had peeled back to bare wood in places. The snowdrifts had swallowed the lower halves of fence posts, and the gate's latch had rusted half open. Tomas lifted the latch and stepped through. It was dead silent except for the crunch of his boots. No barking dogs, no horses, not even crows. Just the sound of him walking toward a place he'd once run from. The front steps groaned under his weight. The door wouldn't open, it was locked. He knocked once, then again, knuckles stinging from cold. The sound of tires on gravel made him turn. A silver SUV pulled into the drive and parked beside the leaning barn. A woman climbed out. Long wool coat, dark hair pulled back, briefcase in hand. She looked out of place and completely at ease. Tomas 3 Feathers, she called. He nodded. Patricia Highrunner. She held out her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm, quick. I've got the key and the documents, she said, pulling a small ring of keys from her coat pocket. We'll need to go over everything once we're inside, but I imagine you'll want a moment. The lock fought her for a few seconds before giving in. The door opened with a dry creak, and a gust of air spilled out, cold and old, thick with dust, and the faint smell of lavender. Tomas stepped inside. It was darker than expected. Patricia flicked the light switch by the door. Nothing. Power's off, she said. Disconnected last month. I brought a flashlight. She handed it to him. The beam cut across the room, revealing dust-covered furniture beneath white sheets, a wood stove filled with ash, and a calendar still hanging on the kitchen wall. November. 2 months ago. A date circled in red Tomas's day, a heart next to it. His throat clenched. I'll be outside, Patricia said, quiet now. Take the time you need. He moved through the house slowly. Every creak of the floorboards felt like memory. The kitchen smelled like it always had: coffee, grease, old wood. There were dishes in the sink, dry and crusted like she'd been interrupted mid-morning. A worn coat still hung by the back door. Her boots lined up beneath the bench, the kind of details that should have disappeared already, but hadn't. He ran his fingers across the kitchen table, the same surface where he used to do schoolwork, where Mina set out stew in heavy bowls that always burned his tongue because he wouldn't wait. In the living room, a blanket still draped over the arm of the couch, folded neatly. The photos on the wall were faded, but he recognized everyone. His parents on horseback. Mina as a young woman standing next to his grandfather in front of the barn. Himself age 7, covered in mud, and smiling like the world hadn't cracked open yet. Upstairs, her bedroom was cold but tidy. The bed made. On the nightstand, a small Bible, a lamp, and a photo of him, probably from school. The frame had a tiny dent in the corner. He picked it up and held it close, then set it back down before the shaking in his hands gave him away. Downstairs again, Patricia was waiting by the fireplace. "This is the full estate file," she said, holding out the briefcase. "You don't need to sign anything yet. Just read it. And there's something else." She reached into her coat and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Mina gave this to me 6 months ago," she said. "Her instructions were clear. If you came back to the land, if you saw it with your own eyes, then you deserved to read this. But not before." The envelope was yellowed, the wax seal cracked slightly at the edges. His grandmother's initials were carved into the seal. His hands barely moved as he took it. "I'll come back tomorrow," Patricia said, moving toward the door. "You'll have questions. When you're ready, we'll talk next steps." And then she was gone. Tomas stood alone in the center of the house. The silence was heavy now. Not empty, but waiting. He looked down at the envelope. The land outside groaned under the weight of wind and snow, but inside something was shifting. Something was beginning. He held the envelope close, walked to the kitchen table, and sat. The roof sagged, the porch creaked, but somehow it had waited for me. Tomas sat at the kitchen table, the sealed envelope untouched in front of him. The house felt like it was holding its breath. Every corner carried her Mina in the silence. The wood grain in the table, the faint scent of mint tea still clinging to the walls, the creak of the floor near the sink where she used to hum while cooking. He wasn't ready to open it. Not yet. He stood up, pushing the chair back slowly, and walked to the front door. The wind had died down, and outside the world was still. Light snow had begun to fall again, soft and clean, covering everything in a thin, even coat. He stepped out onto the porch. The boards under his feet gave a long, tired groan, like they were greeting an old weight. His weight. He looked across the land, 200 acres stretching toward the foothills wrapped in white and winter silence. He could almost see the outline of the corral, where he used to feed the horses, the weathered skeleton of the chicken coop, the barn that had once blazed bright red, now dulled to the color of dried blood. It looked forgotten, but not abandoned. There was a difference. Abandonment meant no one planned to come back. This felt more like a pause, a long, hard winter after a season of trying. A crunch of snow behind him made him turn. A figure was walking up the drive, bundled in a heavy coat scarf, wrapped around her neck boots, kicking through the powder, like she knew the path by heart. For a second, Tomas thought he was imagining it, but then he saw the long, dark braid swinging over her shoulder, the steady eyes beneath the fur-lined hood. "Ella," he said, surprised at how much his voice cracked. She stopped at the bottom step and looked up at him. "Heard you were back." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. She stepped onto the porch without waiting for permission, brushing snow from her sleeves. "Ray Crowbelt saw you get dropped off yesterday. Word travels fast, you know that." Tomas nodded. "Didn't think anyone'd care." Ella tilted her head. "Your grandmother was loved, Tomas. People care more than you think." He didn't know what to say to that, so he stepped aside and opened the door. "Come in. It's cold." Inside, she rubbed her hands together and glanced around. "Looks the same. Maybe quieter. No power. Patricia said they shut it off last month." She walked through the kitchen like it was still familiar, like she could still see the stove working the kettle whistling. "I used to come here after school sometimes. Mina would make me fry bread if I said my grandma's was dry." Tomas smiled small and crooked. She had opinions about everyone's cooking. Ella's gaze landed on the envelope still sitting on the table. Her eyes flicked up to his. "What's that?" "She left it for me. Told Patricia not to give it to me unless I came back here first. Saw it for myself." You gonna read it? He hesitated. I will. Just not yet. Ella walked to the window and stared out. You know Snowhawk's been circling this place for years, right? They tried to buy from your parents before the crash, and again after. Your grandma never budged. Yeah, Tomas said softly. I know now. Ella turned back to him. They're not just buying land. They're clearing memory. All the families they've bought out those stories are gone. Just dirt and profit now. He looked down at the table, then back at her. You sound like Mina. She taught me, Ella said simply. Taught a lot of us. Not with big speeches, just by showing up. There was a moment between them, quiet and real. Then she broke it gently. I brought food. There's stew in the thermos and bannock wrapped in foil. Figured you weren't eating. Tomas blinked, realizing how hollow his stomach felt. Thanks. You didn't have to. She shrugged. Didn't do it for you. Did it for her. He smiled again, just a little more this time. They sat at the table. Tomas poured stew into a bowl and passed it between them. It tasted like home. Ella ate slowly, eyes drifting across the room. You thinking about selling? She asked eventually. I don't know, he said. The debt's heavy. 42,000 seems like a lot. Ella looked at him, really looked. But what's the cost? He didn't answer. After they finished eating, Ella stood and walked to the front door. She paused there, one hand on the knob. You don't have to decide today. Just don't decide while the lights are still off. He nodded. I won't. Outside, the snow had thickened. She pulled her hood up. I'll come by tomorrow, she said. Check on the pipes. Make sure nothing's cracked. This cold'll eat through everything if you're not careful. Okay. She hesitated, then looked back at him one last time. Your grandma believed in staying, but she also believed in choosing. Whatever you do, make it yours. And then she was gone, her boots crunching down the drive braid swinging behind her, like a line tied to something old and unbroken. Tomas stood at the window long after she disappeared into the snowfall. The land stretched wide and quiet beyond the fence line. The house groaned again in the wind, like it remembered every word ever spoken inside it. He turned back to the table. The envelope weighted wax seal intact, as if it knew the weight it carried. He reached for it, then stopped. First, he needed to see more. Not words, not numbers. The place itself. The barn, the fence line. The things Mina fought to keep alive even when no one else could see the value. He threw on his jacket and boots, grabbed the flashlight, and stepped back outside. The snow had softened underfoot, muffling his steps. He walked past the porch, past the side of the house, where the firewood lay buried beneath a crust of ice, and toward the barn. The door hung crooked, half off its hinges. Inside, the smell of hay and rust and old rain greeted him. The stalls were empty. The rafters sagged. But there were still tools on the wall. A shovel. A bent pitchfork. A halter hanging from a nail like someone meant to use it again someday. He stood there in the dim light, breathing it all in. It hadn't given up. Not yet. And neither would he. He turned back toward the house, the beam of his flashlight cutting across the snow. Tomorrow, he'd open the letter. Tonight, he'd sleep in the cold, in her room, with the roof over him. Because somehow, it had waited for him. And it was time to find out why. $42,000 to erase everything she bled into this soil. Tomas stood at the sink the next morning, rinsing his face with ice-cold water from a jug. His breath hung in the air, visible even inside the house. The wood stove had burned out hours ago, leaving the rooms to settle back into the kind of cold that made your bones ache. He hadn't slept much. The wind had picked up just after midnight, scraping the roof like claws. The silence between the gusts had been worse. He'd slept in Mina's bed anyway, wrapped in 3 blankets, his legs curled up tight. Her scent was mostly gone now, just a trace of lavender tucked into the corners of her pillow. Enough to make it feel like she was still nearby, watching, waiting for him to figure out what came next. The letter still sat on the kitchen table unopened. Tomas stared at it for a long time, thumb tracing the edge of the paper. But even now, with the land pressing in around him, he wasn't ready. Whatever was inside that envelope would change things. He could feel it in his gut. And there was already enough change in the air. A knock at the door made him jump. He crossed the living room, pulling it open to see Patricia standing there again, her coat flecked with snow and a thermos steaming in her hands. "Morning," she said. "Thought you might need this." Tomas stepped aside, letting her in. She handed him the thermos. "Coffee. Hot and strong." "I figured you'd want to go over the details in person," she said, already unbuttoning her coat. "It's a lot to process over the phone." He didn't answer. Just walked to the table, cleared off the envelope and a stray spoon, and waited as she set her briefcase down and clicked it open. Patricia laid out a series of papers, aligning them with a careful hand. "This is the full breakdown of what your grandmother left, and what you're responsible for if you choose to keep it." He nodded, staring down at the numbers that blurred in front of him. "There's a mortgage in default 3 payments behind. Unpaid property taxes going back 14 months. Utility bills. Maintenance liens from the county. It adds up to about 31,000, give or take." Tomas swallowed hard. "And then there's this." She slid a crisp document across the table. "Purchase offer from Snowhawk Properties. $42,000 for the land, the house, and any remaining structures." He read the first line, then looked away. "They're trying to expand their ski operations," she continued. "They've already bought 3 neighboring properties. Your land is in the middle of the stretch they want. It's a strategic purchase." Tomas stared out the window. The barn, the fences, the line of cottonwoods along the creek that had always turned gold in fall. He pictured bulldozers leveling at all new roads, splitting through where wild grass used to grow. "What would I walk away with?" he asked. "Roughly 11,000 after debts are cleared," Patricia said. "Could be a little more or less depending on closing fees." "Is that all it's worth?" he asked, not hiding the edge in his voice. Patricia looked at him. "Market value and real value aren't the same thing." He nodded once, slowly. "You don't have to decide today," she added. "But Snowhawk's offer expires in 13 days. They're moving quickly." Tomas stood and walked to the window. The coffee warmed his hands, but not much else. "She never wanted to sell," he said. "No," Patricia agreed. "She turned them down 4 times in the last year. Even when they raised their offer. Why, she believed it was yours. She called it your inheritance, your connection to something bigger." He turned to face her. "And now I get to decide whether to bury it or sell it off for scraps." Patricia met his eyes. "Yes. You get to decide." She began repacking her papers. "I'll check in again before the deadline. If you need help with anything in the meantime, budget estimates permits, whatever, call me. My card's in the file." She paused at the door. "There's value here, Tomas. But you already know that." Then she was gone. The wind picked up again, rattling the porch rails. Tomas sat back at the table and opened the thermos. The heat rose into his face like memory. He took a sip, set it down, and picked up the envelope. His fingers hesitated over the seal. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he bundled up, grabbed the flashlight, and headed outside again. The cold slapped his face, but he ignored it. He followed the path behind the barn to where the lot sloped down into a low field. He used to race through this stretch with the dog at his heels. Now it was buried in snow and silence. He crossed to the far fence line where the barbed wire sagged between posts like tired arms. Beyond it, the hills rolled in quiet layers toward the mountains, their peaks hidden by thick clouds. This was where his father had argued with Mina, right here in the yard. Tomas had heard it through the walls, heard his father yell about money, about survival, about the ranch never paying enough to keep them afloat. Heard Mina say that the land didn't owe them anything, that it was theirs to protect, not to profit from. That night, his parents drove into town to meet with a lawyer. The roads were slick. The curve on Highway 2 took them too fast. By the time the police knocked on the door, Mina was already standing in the kitchen, hands shaking around her mug. Tomas had been 7. Now he was 18, standing in the same yard where the argument started, where the fight that broke everything had taken root. The wind blew sideways, dusting the snow across the old boot tracks he'd made the day before. He turned back toward the house. At the porch steps, he paused. Someone else was coming up the road. Ella again, a pack over her shoulder, and snow clinging to her jeans. "You look like someone carrying the weight of 1,000 ghosts," she said when she reached him. "I might be," Tomas said. She handed him the pack. "I brought wire cutters. That gate's falling apart." He gave her a look. "You don't have to fix things for me." "I'm not." She smiled. "I'm fixing them for her." Inside, they stomped off their boots. Tomas sat back down at the table, the envelope still sitting between his hands. Ella watched him for a while, then sat across from him without saying a word. Finally, he looked up. "You ever wonder what it'd be like to just leave, walk away? Start fresh?" "All the time," she said. "Then I remember what would be lost if everyone did." Tomas pressed his thumb into the wax seal. "I think I'm ready." And this time he meant it. If you're reading this, it means you came home, and that means you're ready to know the truth. The wax cracked under Tomas's thumb like dry bark. He peeled it away slowly, careful not to tear the envelope. The paper inside was folded into thirds, the creases soft with time. Her handwriting met him like an old voice, shaky now, but still firm. Slanted, narrow strokes that had always looked like they were leaning into the wind. Ella didn't speak. She just sat across from him, watching his face, hands folded on the table, the wire cutters she'd brought forgotten beside her pack. Tomas unfolded the letter and began to read. "Dear Tomas, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it means you came home. I'm proud of you for that. Truly. You've already done the hardest thing, walking back into a place that holds more silence than comfort. Facing the weight that waited for you here. You've probably heard the numbers by now. The debt, the bills, the offer. I know how that looks. Like I left you a burden. But I promise you, it's not the whole story." Tomas blinked hard. His fingers tightened around the edges of the page. "There's something I never told you. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't want to lay more weight on you while you were still fighting to stay afloat. The night your parents died, they weren't just driving home from town. They were coming back from a meeting with a lawyer. They were going to sell their half of the ranch to a company called Snowhawk Properties. They were in debt. Your father's business had failed, and they were drowning. We'd fought about it that morning. I said selling would erase everything your grandfather built, everything he bled into this land. I said it would tear us in two. And I said some things I regret. That night they drove into a storm, angry and tired. And they never came back. Tomas lowered the page, staring at the floor. The ache in his chest was different now, not grief, but the raw sting of understanding. Of old questions finally finding answers that hurt more than silence ever did. Ella shifted slightly, but didn't interrupt. He kept reading. After that, Snowhawk backed off. For a while. But they came back just like you saw. Letters, calls, visits. Offers that kept getting higher. And I said no. Every single time. Because I wanted you to have a choice. I didn't trust banks, not after what they did to our neighbors, so I sold timber rights, grazing leases, and I saved every bit of it in cash. I hid it. 3 places on the land. Enough to give you a real chance, not just survival. A choice. Tomas reached the end of the first page and flipped to the second. His hands were shaking now. Use it however you want. Sell the land. Fix the house. Build something new. I won't judge you, not from wherever I am now. But if you do decide to fight, if you want to save this place, then the money will help. The map is on the back of this letter. 3 locations, each one marked. You'll find the money buried in sealed boxes. I labeled them just in case I don't get to tell you this myself. But Tomas, more than the money I hope you find, the reasons why this land mattered. Why we held on when letting go would have been easier. This place remembers. It carries stories. And it carries us even when we don't know how to carry ourselves. You are not broken. You are not what the system labeled you. You are my grandson. And this is your home. Mina, he read the last few lines 3 times. Then he turned the letter over. The map was hand-drawn but precise. He recognized the markers, old fence posts, the well house, the root cellar. 3 red X's, each with a depth written beside it. 4 feet, 5. 3. Ella leaned forward finally. What is it? Thomas passed her the letter. She read silently, eyes flicking across the page, her breath catching near the middle. When she looked back up, her expression was different. Softer. Fierce, too. She really did all that she said. Every bit Tomas said. How much do you think it is? She said. 47,000. Enough to cover the debt. Some left over. Ella nodded slowly. She gave you a real choice. Tomas folded the letter carefully and stood. I'm going to find it. Now she asked, startled. It's there. She wouldn't have lied. I want to see it with my own eyes. Ella stood too, grabbing her coat. Then I'm coming with you. The snow had stopped and the sun was doing its best to push through the thick gray sky. They crossed the yard toward the first marked location, the well house behind the garden shed. The wood was still solid, the door swollen from weather, but not broken. Tomas pried it open and stepped inside. It smelled of cold metal and damp earth. He cleared the snow and brush from the ground near the back wall. Then he took the old shovel that leaned against the shed and started digging. The top layer was frozen stubborn. Every thrust of the blade jarred his shoulders, but beneath it, the dirt softened. Tomas worked silently, breath hard, and clouds rising from his mouth. At 4 feet, the shovel struck something solid. He froze. Ella dropped to her knees beside him. Together they unearthed the box. It was metal taped shut, weathered but intact. Tomas brushed it off with his sleeve and cracked it open. Bundles of cash, each one wrapped in plastic. Dry. Safe. A note inside the lid read, "First, use it wisely." Tomas stared at it for a long time. His chest felt tight, but not in the way it had before. This was different. Ella looked at him. She really believed in you. He nodded once, still staring at the box. I think I'm starting to believe in me, too. He stood up and looked across the yard toward the next X on the map behind the barn. There were 2 more boxes to find, but already the ground felt different beneath his feet. The land didn't feel like something dying anymore. It felt like it was waiting to be claimed. If you dig where I marked, you'll find more than money, you'll find what I believe you are. Tomas leaned against the barn wall, catching his breath. The wind had picked up again, sharp and slicing low across the valley, kicking up loose snow and stinging his cheeks. His gloves were soaked through fingertips, numb, and his shoulders ached from swinging the shovel like it was trying to fight him back. The second mark on the map was behind the barn, just past the fence where the land dipped toward the tree line. Tomas had cleared the snow, broken through the frozen top layer of earth, and now he was standing in a pit almost 5 feet deep. The air in the hole was warmer than the wind above it. Ella crouched nearby, flashlight beam steady, watching for the shimmer of metal in the dirt. Her cheeks were flushed red from the cold, hair pulled back tight, eyes steady on him. Try a little more toward the post, she said, pointing at the weathered fence line. Tomas shifted, jammed the shovel in again, and hit something solid. His heart jumped. He dropped to his knees and cleared it with his hands. Another metal box, smaller than the first, but just as heavy. He pulled it free and lifted it up over the edge of the hole, climbing out after it. The box was crusted with frost, but the latch gave way easily. Inside, stacks of bills again, carefully wrapped in more plastic. Beneath them, a note in Mina's handwriting. Second. Third. For repairs and hope. Tomas let out a breath that fogged in the air. It felt like something loosened in his chest. Not relief exactly, but a kind of trust, like the ground beneath his feet had quit testing him and started holding him up. Ella leaned over his shoulder. How much do you think is in this one? At least 16,000, she said, between the 3 boxes. You could pay off the whole debt, she whispered. Keep the place, start over. Tomas nodded slowly. Yeah. He packed the box, carefully stood, and looked back toward the house. The third mark was under the root cellar, the one place he hadn't gone yet. You okay to keep going? Ella asked. He nodded again. Yeah, I need to see it through. They carried the box back and left it in the kitchen beside the first. Both looked out of place against the cracked linoleum and chipped enamel of the counter, like pieces of a different life. Tomas felt the weight of them just standing near. It wasn't just about money. It was about the quiet kind of love that kept people warm in the middle of winter when there wasn't enough firewood left. Outside, the sun was falling fast behind the mountains. The snow had a pink hue now, softening the world. Tomas pulled on a second layer of socks, grabbed another pair of gloves, and headed for the root cellar. The entrance was half covered in drifted snow. He kicked at it until the top edge of the wooden door appeared. It took both of them to pry it open, hinges groaning loud as a scream. A musty scent rose up, damp earth, old potatoes, something deeper underneath. Tomas descended first, flashlight in hand. The stone walls of the cellar were coated with a thin sheen of ice. He moved carefully across the packed dirt floor, stopping near the far wall where a loose stone jutted out just like the map had shown. He knelt, pressed his fingers into the cracks, and worked the stone free. Behind it, the ground had been disturbed before. A small hollow. He dug with his hands now, the cold biting into his skin, even through the gloves. Then the third box emerged, smaller than the others, wrapped in canvas, sealed with wax. He carried it back upstairs where Ella waited by the door. They opened it together in the kitchen. Inside was a third bundle of cash, again, about 16,000. But on top of the bills lay something else, a photograph. Tomas lifted it gently. It showed him as a child, maybe 7, sitting on his grandfather's shoulders. Mina stood beside them, laughing, arm looped through her husband's. The barn behind them still stood straight and proud, its paint a fresh coat of red. The sun had been out that day. He could see it in the way their shadows fell across the dirt. On the back, in Mina's handwriting, were the words, "This is who you come from. This is what we were before grief found us. Don't let the hard years make you forget there was joy here once. And there can be again, if you're willing to fight for it." Tomas sat down slowly, hands gripping the edges of the photograph. The tightness returned to his throat, different from the cold. His chest ached, full of everything she'd said, without ever saying it out loud. Ella didn't speak. She just sat beside him, hands folded, waiting for him to come back from wherever he'd just gone. After a long moment, he laid the photo down between the boxes. All of it was here now, Mina's love, her trust, her history, and his decision. She could have sold it, he said. She could have taken that money, moved into town, gotten help, but she didn't. Ella said, because she believed it mattered, that you mattered. Tomas stood and walked to the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, light flakes drifting like ash in the fading light. She saved all this for me, he said, even when I was locked up, even when I didn't give her a reason to. She knew you'd come back. He turned to her. I think I have to stay. Her eyes didn't widen in surprise. They just softened. Then you stay, and you build something with it. He looked at the boxes, the photo, the notes. The map lay folded on the table, now edges damp from snow and sweat. This isn't just about a house, he said. It's about remembering who we are. Ella nodded. And showing everyone else we're not gone yet. The fire in the stove cracked its warmth, finally spreading through the room. Tomas stepped outside one more time that night, flashlight in hand, snow dusting his shoulders as he crossed the yard again. He stood at the top of the ridge near the tree line and looked down at the lights of Browning in the distance, blinking faintly through the dark. Then he looked back at the house windows, glowing now with a soft, flickering amber. He'd been buried once by silence, by systems, by shame. But now he was digging back out. And this time he wasn't doing it for survival. He was doing it for hope. If you're going to stay, you're going to need more than a shovel, you'll need roots. Tomas stood in the morning cold, a coil of steam rising from his coffee cup as he looked out over the yard. The snow had crusted overnight, thick and heavy, shining like a sheet of hammered glass. His boots left clean prints across the porch. The sky was open and sharp above him, streaked with pale orange where the sun tried to push its way up from behind the mountains. He had 3 boxes full of cash locked in the bedroom, a photo of a better time pinned to the fridge with a magnet, and a fire burning low in the stove. The electricity was still off. The water lines hadn't burst, he'd checked, but they would if he didn't get heat running soon. The roof leaked in 2 places. The barn doors needed to be rehung. One of the fence posts had collapsed entirely near the road. And still he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Ella had stayed late the night before, helped him write out the full list of repairs, checked on the condition of the generator, and even called her cousin in town to ask about propane deliveries. Tomas didn't know what to make of how easily she'd stepped into his chaos, how naturally she spoke about we as if she were part of it all now. The sky above him churned with low clouds. Weather was coming. He turned back into the house, grabbed his notebook from the kitchen table, and scribbled a list: roof, stove, windows, wiring. At the top, in darker pencil, he wrote, "Clear the mortgage, settle taxes," and under that, "Talk to Ray." Ray Crowbelt had been a friend of Tomas's grandfather, one of the old-timers who still ran cattle on the south end of the valley. Mina had mentioned him often. A widower, sharp as barbed wire when he wanted to be, but decent underneath. Tomas hadn't seen him in years. By the time he walked the 2 miles of snow-packed road to Ray's place, the sky had gone from gray to steel. The wind was rising again, this time with the smell of snow in it. Ray's house sat at the edge of a pine brake, his corral visible from the road. A string of horses huddled at the far end, heads low against the cold. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Tomas climbed the steps and knocked once. The door opened before he could knock again. Ray stood in the doorway in a flannel shirt, suspenders over his shoulders, and a mug in one hand. His eyes, cloudy blue, squinted as they settled on Tomas's face. "Well, hell," Ray said. "You look just like your grandfather when he came to tell me his barn roof collapsed in the blizzard of '85. Tomas smiled without meaning to. Might be about the same kind of problem. Ray stepped aside. "Come in then. Tell me what broke." The inside of the cabin was warm and close, wood-paneled walls lined with old photos and shelves of books. A wood-burning stove hissed in the corner. Tomas unzipped his jacket and sat where Ray pointed. "You were locked up, right?" Ray asked, settling into the chair across from him. "Yeah," Tomas said. "Got out 2 weeks ago." "You do it, no. But I was in the car." Ray took a long sip of coffee and said nothing for a while. "I heard about Mina," he said finally. "Damn shame. She was tougher than winter. She left me the ranch," Tomas said. "But it's a mess. Owed back taxes, busted roof, broken pipes, a stove that only half works." Ray raised an eyebrow. "And I'm staying," Tomas said. "I'm going to fix it." Ray chuckled once. "Hell of a decision." "I need help," Tomas said. "Not just with the work, with knowing how." Ray leaned back, folding his hands over his belly. "If you're going to stay, you're going to need more than a shovel. You'll need roots. People. Knowledge. You gotta start on that. I have the money to cover the debt," Tomas said. "But I want to build something. Not just survive." Ray tapped the arm of his chair. "That land's stubborn. It takes and takes before it gives. But if you treat it right, if you learn how to listen, it gives back eventually." "I want to learn," Tomas said. "The right way." Ray studied him a long time. "You come back tomorrow," he said. "Sun up. I'll show you how to check fences, teach you to read the ground before you plant anything. You start there. Everything else will come." Tomas stood, zipped his jacket. "Thank you." Ray nodded. "Your grandfather was a good man. He'd be glad to see someone breathing life into that place again." Outside, the wind had turned mean. Flakes of snow blew sideways, stinging Tomas's face as he walked. But he moved quickly, the cold nothing compared to the heat building behind his ribs. He had a plan now, a path. Back at the ranch, he found Ella on the porch, her scarf wrapped up to her eyes, a binder clutched in her arms. "I told you I'd bring ideas," she said through the wind. He helped her inside and built the fire back up while she set her things out on the kitchen table. "This is everything the tribal council has in terms of land partnership options," she said. "Cultural programs, youth camps, even small-scale ag projects. If you want this ranch to mean something beyond just you, this is how." Tomas leafed through the pages. Budget templates, program proposals, contact names. His head spun a little. Ella touched his arm gently. "You don't have to decide tonight. But you should start thinking about what kind of story you want this land to tell. He looked up at her. Really looked. A story that stays, he said. One that won't be paved over. Ella smiled. That's a good place to start. They ate together at the kitchen table, stew reheated on the stove, and bread she'd brought from town. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, the house was warm. That night, Tomas moved the photo of him and his grandparents to the mantel above the wood stove. He placed it between the two old candle holders Mina had always kept full of wax, but never lit. The boxes of money stayed locked away, but their presence filled the house like breath. He crawled into bed with sore hands, a full belly, and the first true sense of direction he'd felt in years. Tomorrow there would be fences to walk. Tomorrow there would be work to do. But tonight there was a fire burning, and the house no longer felt like it was waiting. It felt like it had started again. The first time the wood stove lit, it felt like the house exhaled, and so did I. Tomas stood in the living room, crouched over the iron belly of the old wood stove with a match in his fingers. He struck at the flame, catching with a hiss, and fed it into the tinder he'd stacked tight, dry pine shavings, a twist of newspaper, and kindling, split by hand. The flame caught. Rose. He knelt there, holding still as it climbed the logs and crackled into life. It didn't roar like the forced heat from prison vents or the quiet hum of baseboards in motels. It lived. It breathed. And as the first wave of warmth rolled out into the room, Tomas leaned back onto his heels and let out a breath that had been sitting in his chest for 2 years. The stove worked. The heat was real. And for the first time since his release, the house felt like it was fighting with him instead of against him. Outside, the wind pushed snow across the yard in slow, sweeping waves. A storm had passed through overnight, leaving behind a crust of ice and sky so pale it felt like it could break. But inside, the floor warmed under his feet, and the glass in the windows no longer felt like it might shatter from the cold. He moved room to room, checking for leaks, wiping down surfaces long coated in dust. He ran water into the sinks and flushed the bathroom to be sure the lines hadn't cracked. A few groaned, but nothing burst. Later that morning, Ella showed up again with a propane tech from Cut Bank and a van full of parts. The guy was in his 50s, bundled up in denim and fleece, and looked at Tomas like he wasn't sure whether to talk to him or wait for someone older. Tomas met him head-on, showed him the basement access, walked him through the old system, stood shoulder to shoulder as they figured out how to reattach lines and reseal joints. The man grunted approval by the end. "You know what you're doing." "No," Tomas said, wiping his hands on a rag. "But I'm learning." The tech nodded once. "You'll do all right." They left 2 full tanks behind and promised delivery every 3 weeks. Tomas paid cash from the second box, careful to log it in the notebook he kept beside the fridge. He was learning to think like Mina had. Every dollar with a reason. Every reason tied to the land. That afternoon, Ray Crowbelt pulled into the drive with a rusted trailer and a load of lumber. "Figured you'd need something solid to patch that roof," he said, climbing out of his truck. "And it's been sitting in my shed for 6 years. Better here than rotting where no one sees it." Tomas helped him unload. Ray taught him how to inspect each board for cracks, how to measure over sagging beams and brace joists that had shifted. They worked until the light gave out, then sat on the porch eating venison jerky from a brown paper sack. "You're putting in the work," Ray said. "That matters. People notice." Tomas wiped sweat from his brow, breath steaming in the cold. "You think the place can be saved?" Ray looked out over the snow-covered fields, the broken fence lines, the barn with one door hanging by a single hinge. "I think it already is," he said. "You're just catching up to it." By the end of the week, Tomas had a new rhythm. Mornings started with wood smoke and hot coffee. Midday brought noise, hammering drilling repairs that shook the dust from the bones of the house. Nights ended with aching arms and sore backs, and the steady comfort of Ella's voice reading paperwork aloud, running her fingers down budgets and application forms. He filed the paperwork to clear Mina's back taxes with a cashier's check at the tribal office. The clerk stared at the amount and raised an eyebrow, but didn't say a word. He left the building lighter than he'd walked in. Still, not everyone welcomed him. At the hardware store, a man Tomas didn't know leaned against the counter and asked, "You're Mina's grandson, right? The one from lockup?" Tomas paused, met his gaze, and said, "That's right." The man scoffed. "Didn't think you'd come back." "I almost didn't." "Place is cursed," the man muttered. "Swallowed 3 generations." Tomas didn't answer, just paid for his nails and left without looking back. Some stories people told to feel safe, others to keep folks in their place. He had no interest in either. He passed the church later that day, snow piled high along its steps, icicles hanging from the awning. The sign out front read, "Second chances are still sacred." He stood there a while before walking on. That night, Ella brought her cousin with her, a quiet kid named Jonah, maybe 16, who shuffled his boots on the porch before Tomas opened the door. "He's looking for work," Ella said. "Says he wants to learn something real." Tomas looked Jonah over. "You know how to swing a hammer?" "No," Jonah said. "But I can learn." Tomas smiled. "That's all that matters." By the end of their first day, Jonah had patched a window with salvaged glass and rewired a light in the mudroom under Ray's careful direction. When Tomas paid him with crisp 20s, Jonah stared like he'd never held that much at once. "You come back tomorrow," Tomas said. "We've got more to do." Jonah nodded quiet, but his eyes were full of something Tomas recognized: hunger. Not for money, for meaning. For place. The next morning, the old radio on the windowsill buzzed back to life. The first notes were static, then a woman's voice drifted in low and warm, reading headlines about the weather school closures and a bingo night at the community hall. Tomas turned it up. Let it play. The stove crackled. The floorboards warmed. The house didn't creak the same way anymore. Something had shifted. It wasn't just a structure now. It was a home again. He didn't just want to fix the house. He wanted to repair what the years had torn and root himself so deep the wind couldn't shake him again. Tomas stood in the barn. Sleeves rolled past his elbows, sawdust clinging to his shirt like snow. The air was thick with the smell of cedar and sweat. A hammer dangled from his hand. Light filtered in through the slats above the door, streaking across the floor like a path out of the dark. Jonah was up on the ladder, steadying a beam, while Ray secured it with long wood screws. The barn's bones were old, but still strong. They creaked sometimes, but they held. "She's solid," Ray said, stepping back to inspect their work. "Just needed someone to remind her." Tomas smiled, resting a hand on one of the new joists. "Don't we all?" It had been weeks now. The storm had passed, the snow had hardened into crust along the fence lines, and the sky carried more light with each passing day. Tomas could feel the season shifting not just in the wind, but in himself. There was rhythm now, purpose. The days had a shape again. They'd replaced the barn doors last week, hung them straight, and sealed the gaps. A new lock kept out the worst of the cold. The roof no longer leaked. Inside the floor was swept the hay stacked neatly, and the old tack cleaned and hung with quiet pride. Tomas found himself lingering in the space, longer than he needed to, as if the stillness there reminded him of something he couldn't quite name. Jonah climbed down, wiping his forehead. You think she would have kept all this going if she were still here? Tomas paused. Yeah, she'd have kept going until she couldn't lift a hammer. That's who she was. She left a hell of a blueprint, Ray added. They walked back toward the house just before dusk, the snow crunching beneath their boots. In the distance, the Blackfeet Mountains were cast in purple shadow. The cold didn't bite the same anymore. It settled. Inside, Ella was at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and coffee cups, fingers buried in a stack of grant applications. She looked up when they walked in. You smell like sawdust and pride, she said, half smiling. Tomas leaned in and kissed her cheek. We got the last beam up. She pushed a paper across the table. Then here's what's next. There's an infrastructure fund from the Tribal Development Council. We qualify for equipment upgrades, irrigation, if you want to do crop work, and possible retrofitting of the barn for educational use. Tomas sank into the chair beside her. Educational workshops, apprenticeships, maybe even summer programs. We've got youth in town with nowhere to go but trouble. You give them a place to show up, you give them more than just shelter. You give them a direction. He read the lines carefully, lips moving silently as he scanned each detail. I don't want to just put new paint on the house, he said. I want to give it legs, something that walks on past me. Ella's voice softened. Then this is how. The next few days blurred with motion. They submitted the application together. Tomas signed the papers with a pen that had been Mina's, the ink thick and black. Jonah brought in his cousin, a girl named Arlene, who could weld better than any adult Tomas had ever met. She looked around the barn once and said, This place is too damn quiet. Let's give it some noise. By midweek, the ranch sounded like work, power tools, laughter, the kind of noise that came from things being built instead of broken. But not everyone approved. One afternoon, as Tomas returned from the feed store, he saw a white pickup truck parked at the edge of the property just outside the main gate. A man stood beside it, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding his eyes. Tomas pulled up slowly, stepped out, and left the door open. You're Tomas Highwalker, the man asked, voice clipped. Who's asking? Michael Fraser, Snowhawk Properties. I've been trying to reach you. Tomas didn't move. I've seen the letters. Well, we're here in person now, Fraser said, offering a thin smile. That usually moves things forward. I'm not selling. Fraser raised his eyebrows, exaggerated. That's surprising. From what we heard, the place was falling apart. It was, Tomas said. Not anymore. You realize we're offering above market $42,000 for land and structure. And I already turned down the same deal my grandmother refused, Tomas said. So unless you've got something better than numbers, you're wasting gas. Fraser didn't flinch. You can't stop progress. This valley is changing. You either get ahead of it or you get buried under it. Tomas took a slow step forward. Then I guess I'm digging in. The man's smile faded. You'll regret it, he said. This place can't protect you from what's coming. Tomas didn't respond. He stood there until Fraser turned, climbed into the truck, and drove off down the snow-packed road, tires spitting gravel behind him. Inside, he found Ella at the sink, sleeves rolled up, her hands submerged in soapy water. He walked in, set his keys on the table, and leaned against the counter beside her. They sent someone, he said. She looked up, Snowhawk. He nodded. They'll keep coming, she said. I know, but so will we. That night, Tomas walked out to the barn alone. He lit the lanterns by the door, their glow spilling over the straw-covered floor. The space echoed with quiet, now the kind that came only after hard work. He sat on the old bench in the corner, pulled the photograph from his coat pocket, the one Mina left in the last box. He stared at it a while, tracing her face with his thumb. "I'm doing it, Grandma," he whispered. "Not just for you, for all of us." The barn creaked, but didn't shudder. It listened. They didn't come with torches, but they came to burn it down all the same. Tomas woke before sunrise to the sound of tires on gravel. Not fast, but wrong, too heavy, too early. He threw on his boots, grabbed his coat, and stepped out onto the porch. Shotgun slung casually, but visibly in one hand. 3 trucks idled at the edge of the property near the gate. The kind with contractor logos scraped off, but still visible if you knew what to look for. Men stood near the tailgates, bundled in flannel and vests, hands tucked into pockets, not from cold, but habit. One leaned against a fender, the brim of his cap low over his eyes. Tomas didn't move. The wind pushed his breath sideways as it rose. Ray pulled up behind him not long after his old Chevy rattling to a stop. He climbed out slow, glancing once toward the trucks, then toward Tomas. "They don't look lost," Ray muttered. "No," Tomas said. "They look like a message." Ray spat into the snow. "Well, we've got one too." The man in the cap stepped forward, hands still visible. "Morning," he called. "We're just here to talk." "You always roll deep when you talk," Tomas asked, voice even. The man smirked. "Depends on how loud the other side is." Ray walked forward, slow but steady. "You're on tribal land, son. You're about a half-minute from being escorted off it, depending on how this next sentence goes." The man held up a folder. "We have a development permit pending. We just want to confirm property boundaries. Make sure everyone understands what's changing around here." "This land isn't for sale," Tomas said. "Not to you. Not to Snowhawk." "Funny thing about progress," the man said, taking a step closer. "It doesn't always ask permission." Ray narrowed his eyes. "You threatening this boy's land?" The man looked at Tomas, then smiled like someone who's been told no one too many times. "We'll be seeing you." They left in a cloud of frozen dust. Ray didn't say anything for a while, just stood beside Tomas watching the last truck disappear down the road. "They're getting nervous," Ray finally said. "Good. They'll come again." "I know." Inside, Thomas lit the stove and poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. Ray sat down and took his with a nod. The house was warm now, the rooms filled with tools and paperwork and half-hung frames where photos were waiting to return. "They tried this with your grandfather too," Ray said. "Different name, same tricks. Offered cash land swaps, job guarantees. Then came the bullying." "What did he do?" Ray's smile was grim. "He built a fence, tall, barbed, and full of warning. Then he outlasted them." Tomas looked down at the steam rising from his mug. "I don't want to live behind a wall." "Then make something they can't bulldoze," Ray said. "Make it matter to more than just you." Tomas nodded slow. He looked over to the desk where Ella's grant packets were stacked neat and hopeful. "They're coming at us with money and pressure," he said. "We need to come back with story, with roots." Ray stood, pulled his gloves on. "Then let's get to work." That afternoon, Tomas met with the Tribal Development Council. He brought blueprints, notes, a letter of endorsement signed by Ray, and 2 elders and a folded photograph of his grandmother's land from 1978. The chairwoman listened quietly. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she tapped her pen once against her pad. You understand this isn't just about nostalgia, she said. This is about resilience, about proving that self-determination can be more than just words on a document. I'm not trying to build a museum, Tomas said. I want this place to be alive, teaching kids to fix things, grow food, build something they can be proud of. She considered him for a moment longer, then nodded. You'll have your answer in 2 weeks. Outside, the sun caught the snow in slashes of light. Tomas didn't feel the cold this time. He walked through town with a slow purpose, boots crunching steady, a bag of seed packets in one hand, and the other stuffed in his coat pocket. Ella met him on the porch when he got home. They came back after you left, she said. Tomas's jaw tensed. Who's Snowhawk? Just 2 this time. They didn't get out of the truck. Just sat at the gate for a while. What did you do? I sat on the porch with my coffee, she said. Didn't blink once. He stepped closer, brushed a bit of wind-blown hair from her face. You sure you still want to be part of this? Are you kidding? She said. I'm just getting warmed up. That night they called Jonah, Arlene, and 3 more teens from town. They cleared space in the barn, hung lights, rolled out old mats, and built benches from salvaged wood. Ella brought in a chalkboard. Tomas set out tools and gear. At dawn, the first youth program class started with 6 kids, a broken lawnmower, and a lesson on how engines breathe. By the end of the week, they had 20. Some came for the work. Some came because there was nowhere else. But they all stayed for the fire, the one inside the barn, and the one in Tomas's voice when he spoke about keeping land, keeping legacy. And still the pressure rose. Snowhawk filed a zoning request. Someone dumped oil near their mailbox. Ella's tires were slashed one night after a late meeting. But Tomas didn't flinch. He rebuilt the gate, lit the porch brighter, held class anyway. He painted a sign by the main road Mina Highwalker Cultural and Skills Center land teaches. We listen. Jonah stood beside him, hammer in hand, watching the last nail go in. You think she'd be proud? He asked. Tomas looked at the sign, the land behind it, the barn glowing with life. I think she already is. If they were going to take it, they'd have to come with more than paper, they'd have to walk through fire. The letter came certified, thick envelope, official seal. Tomas stood in the post office parking lot, fingers tight around the edges. The wind whipped through Main Street, dragging grit in its teeth. He didn't open it right away. Just stared at the name, Snowhawk Holdings, LLC. Inside the truck, the heater ticking, he finally tore the flap open. Notice of intent to seize. A legal maneuver. Technical. Slick. Something buried in land usage law and right-of-way clauses. They were using an old easement request from 2 owners back a loophole, and now claimed the ranch's western fence line crossed into land zoned for development infrastructure. A right of access claim. If it held, they could bulldoze a road straight through the field across the creek and into the heart of the property. Not an outright grab, but a surgical strike. They wouldn't need to buy the land. They'd just render it useless. Tomas folded the paper slowly and stared through the windshield. Snowhawk hadn't come for the house. They came for the soul of the place. He drove straight to the council office, boots echoing across tile floors, the letter clenched in one hand. The receptionist looked up, startled. They're going to try and take it, he said. The legal advisor met with him in a back office that smelled of printer toner and wet coats. The man read the letter carefully, frowning more with each line. They're banking on you not fighting this, he said. Most folks don't. It's expensive, slow, designed to wear you down. Do I have a case? You have a damn good case, the advisor said. But they'll bury you in paperwork. Every page will cost time, money, and sleep. I'll give it all, Tomas said. I'm not letting them carve up my grandmother's land. The advisor nodded. Then we'll start with an injunction. It'll freeze everything until the hearing. After that, we build from there. Tomas left with a folder full of documents and a heart full of fire. The next morning, he called a meeting in the barn. The benches were full young workers, elders, Ella, Jonah, Arlene, Ray. Even people he didn't know well. Word had spread. Snowhawk had made it clear they weren't just trying to buy Tomas out. They wanted the land silenced. Tomas stood at the front, the letter pinned behind him on the blackboard. They're trying to come in sideways, he said. Not with bulldozers, not yet, but with ink and signatures, with laws most of us never had a say in. Ray crossed his arms, jaw tight. They want us to fold. But we won't, Tomas said. We're not just keeping buildings standing. We're holding something sacred. This land was ours before their roads ever mattered. We've planted stories here, raised tools and hands, built a future. He looked around the room. Every face was watching him. If they're going to take it, he said quietly, they'll have to come through us. Ella stepped forward, lifting a clipboard. I've drafted a community declaration, she said. Testimonies, affidavits, historical maps, photos. Every voice in here counts. We'll flood them with the truth. Jonah raised his hand. Can we post the letters? Let people read them. Tomas nodded. Every post, every door, every church and diner. Let them know we're not alone. That week, the valley buzzed with motion. Teens canvassed neighborhoods, knocking on doors. Elders brought boxes of old photos and land documents out of cellars and closets. A woman from the Historical Society in Great Falls showed up with a scanner and a box of binders labeled Highwalker Legacy, 1931, present. On Friday, they held a bonfire. Not to destroy, to remember. Each person who spoke tossed a handful of tobacco sweetgrass or dirt into the fire, each one a vow. Ray went last. He stood silent for a while, staring at the flames. This land don't need a savior, he said. It needs keepers. You don't have to be born into it. You just have to love it enough to stay when it gets hard. Tomas stood beside him, the fire casting shadows across his face. The smoke clung to his clothes, his hair, his skin. It smelled like history. Afterward, back at the house, Tomas sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the binder from the Historical Society. There were letters from his grandfather. Old bills of sale, a hand-drawn boundary map from 1943. One corner of the page caught his eye. A note in pencil: boundary dispute, resolved by tribal mediation. Ratified and sealed. He scanned it. There, stamped in faint red, was a tribal seal confirming a boundary agreement nearly identical to what Snowhawk was contesting. His breath caught. He grabbed the phone. By Monday, the council's legal team had a copy scanned and certified. It wasn't just defense, it was a weapon. The easement Snowhawk was claiming had already been extinguished in a case nearly 70 years old. No one had bothered to look that far back. No one expected Tomas to dig that deep. But he had. At the emergency hearing held 3 days later, Snowhawk's lawyers presented their claims in pressed suits and cold tones. Their language was clean, polished. But Tomas sat with his boots on and a binder thick with time. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't raise his voice. He told the judge about Mina, about the boxes she left, the map, the barn, the kids showing up in the cold to build something with their hands, the soil that remembered things no document ever could. And then he handed the judge the binder. This land, Tomas said, isn't waiting for the future. It's already becoming it. The judge took the binder. 3 hours later, the injunction was extended indefinitely. Outside the courthouse, Tomas didn't cheer. He just stood in the parking lot with Ella, the wind catching her scarf, their shadows long against the snow. "They'll come back," she said. "I know, but we're ready now." He nodded, shoulders square, feet planted deep. "No one's walking through this fire but us." The land didn't speak in words. It answered in roots, in walls that stayed standing, in firelight that never flickered out. Tomas woke to birdsong. Not just a single call, but a chorus, robins and meadowlarks echoing through the cottonwoods out by the creek. The snow had melted back from the fence line, and the ground was soft, dark, and breathing. Spring had come. He stood on the porch, mug in hand, watching the mist rise off the field. The house behind him was quiet, but alive. You could feel it now, every plank, every nail, every board mended and made useful again. The kind of quiet that carried weight. Not the silence of emptiness, but the calm that comes after choosing to stay. Down by the barn, Jonah was already unloading the tiller, dragging it out across the field with 2 others from the youth program. They laughed as they struggled through the mud. Sleeves, rolled hair, tied back boots already caked with the black earth. Ella stepped outside beside him, her coat wrapped around her shoulders, hair pulled up in a loose knot. "They're planting early," she said, smiling. He nodded. "They've been waiting, just like the ground." Inside, the kitchen smelled of coffee and sweet fry bread. Arlene had brought it over before dawn, still warm in a towel-lined basket. On the table sat 3 more approval letters, one from the council, confirming long-term land protection status, one from the nonprofit backers releasing the final grant check, and one from the local high school greenlighting the summer apprentice credits for the students. Tomas didn't touch them. Just let them sit there like wildflowers someone had left at a grave or a front door, a symbol of something finished and something beginning. The barn had been transformed. Where once dust and rot clung to the rafters, now there were rows of tools, shelves of materials, and a corner set aside for quiet reflection, a circle of worn chairs, the old photo of Mina framed on the wall above. The kids called it the story space. That's where Tomas went every Friday evening to talk. He never preached, just told pieces of things, how to mend a split rail, how to know if a storm was coming, by the feel of your knees, how Mina used to hum when she was digging post holes, how you had to listen to the land if you wanted it to stay with you. That evening, they held the spring feast. Everyone brought something. Roasted elk, fry bread, choke cherry jam, boiled corn stews thick with carrots and sage. The tables stretched from the barn door to the fire pit, lit by strings of soft lights, powered from the solar array they'd built together. The council chairwoman came. So did the preacher. Even a couple of the skeptics from town, the ones who hadn't spoken much since Tomas came back. No speeches were made. Just shared food and soft laughter stories traded under stars. Later, as the fire burned down to coals, Ray stepped beside Tomas. "You did it," he said. Tomas shook his head. "We did." Ray's smile was crooked, tired, full of pride. "Place feels different now." "It is different," Tomas said. "But it remembers." He walked to the edge of the field before dawn, where the new fence had gone up with cedar posts soaked in linseed oil and care. He looked out over what they'd built, clean rows, tilled and ready. The greenhouse half finished, the barn strong as ever, the house lit soft and warm behind him. He thought about the boy who'd stepped off the bus just months ago, shoulders hunched, hands in his pockets, unsure if he was stepping into a graveyard or a second chance. Now he knew. The land had taken him back, quietly, without ceremony, but it had answered. not with words, but with strength, with life returning, with roots growing deeper than the damage. He crouched at the edge of the row, fingers brushing the soil. A quiet voice behind him said, "You gonna plant today, or just talk to the dirt?" Tomas looked up, grinning. Ella stood there with her sleeves rolled and a basket of seeds. "I was listening," he said. She stepped beside him, handed him a small handful of black sunflower seeds. "Then let's answer." He pushed the first one into the soil, then the next. One by one, others joined Jonah, Arlene, the kids from town, even Ray. They lined the rows knee to ground, hand to soil, planting what would become color food shade. Not just sunflowers. A future. Mina's house stood behind them, watching. The barn open, the mountains unchanged. And in the slow warmth of a morning that had taken its time arriving, Tomas Highwalker planted his story, not just to remember, but to continue, to root it so deep even fire couldn't reach it. The land didn't ask for thanks, but it answered, every time.